Hello. I thought I'd continue reading a little bit out of Lydia. It's a second book, a continuation from book number 1, which is entitled Bliss After Life. I did the audio already. I finished it, finished writing it in 2017. It took me like almost 10 years because I only write when I feel like it. And then I continued writing Lydia. So Bliss After Life is the story about a death. It starts with a death and a reincarnation. In fact, a lot of this is about death and the afterlife and reincarnation. Now, Lydia was born in March 2012, but we are now already at the end of 2012, and I am continuing with chapter 72, and it's Boxing Day. David had insisted on going by himself to pick up Jenny and Ravi at the airport at 6 a.m. He enjoyed a silent drive in the park and in the dark. They had a wonderful Christmas day. They had had a wonderful Christmas day. What a good idea it was to invite his Auntie Lenny and her friend Eva. It had been an even bigger celebration than the year before. He was shaking his head again, thinking of all the changes 2012 had brought to him and all the others he felt who were connected to little Lydia and little Milton. He thought of his daughter who would be arriving, maybe this afternoon or maybe tomorrow. He wasn't quite sure yet. The big house would again be a hub of activity. He had spoken to Jenny yesterday just to make sure he could identify them, but his Auntie Lenny was laughing. Just look out for a raven-haired vivacious woman and her tall and slim, brown, Indian, silver-haired husband. There could not be that many couples like that. He smiled. They did sound remarkable. To top it all, Melanie had been talking to her other grandmother, who she had not seen for months either, although she lived on the outskirts of London. She would also be arriving tomorrow with a friend who would drive her, another lady of advanced age. Thank goodness the big house was no longer a refuge. It was a blessing that they could put up so many people in comfort. He was looking forward to it all. Susan and he would take a trip away after Christmas and spend New Year in the north of Spain, where an old school friend had a beautiful place. He had received invitations for the last 3 years, and this year he decided to take him up on his offer. Susan had sorted the tickets already. They would hire a camper van on arrival and drive at leisure to his old friend's house. He had not seen Robert for 20 years. The last time was when Robert had visited him in Australia after his divorce. He had stayed for 2 months and they had kept loose contact over all these years. He couldn't wait to have a break with Susan. And the camper they had chosen looked the perfect way to travel, slowly but surely. It gave them a chance to venture out, although Robert's place sounded idyllic. Even 3 horses were there. He had missed riding and hadn't even realized it. When he saw the signs for the airport, he concentrated. It was busier than expected here, but he was in good time. Chapter 73, Boxing Day, Evening Celebrations. David arrived with the Canadian visitors almost at the same time as Melanie's grandma's friend parked in front of the big house. Alma and her friend. Melanie was glad that she had agreed to come. She had not had a chance to visit her all year, and talking to her on the phone was just not the same. Melanie led her grandmother and friend into the house where Jenny and Ravi were just taking their coats off, and Susan moved everyone along into the kitchen and conservatory. There was much laughter as the introductions went on, with interjections of previous conversations, and Frida was excitedly running and barking along everybody's legs. David was laughing with his aunt, as it had been no problem identifying Jenny and Ravi, and they had had no problem spotting the handsome tall man in a green winter coat and white-brimmed hat. Lena's description might have been subjective, but Jenny agreed with her. David had made their arrival easy, and They loved the big house. It was so English and grand. He had been telling them about the way Susan had come to own the big house, and Jenny loved the way things worked out in the universe. David was interested in her readings. She admitted that she had a bit of a unique way reading her cards. Obviously, the basic interpretations are guidance, but she felt the answers sometimes before she even picked the card, and she had learned to trust her interpretations. They came out of her mouth before she could stop them, she had said, and he was hoping that they would do some reading for them. He had checked the trains to Leicester, and he would drive them to the station in the centre the next evening. This was to be a short visit for now. They were all gathered in the conservatory. There were 17 of them. Maisie had postponed her visit to the end of the week, and there were many mingling. Susan and David and Holly, Chris and Frida Dog, Ben, Faye and Lydia, Melanie, Tony and Milton, Alma, Melanie's English grandmother and her friend, Anna and Pete, Auntie Leni and friend Eva. There was barely room to move. For Chris, conversations had become too bizarre. He felt Frida could do with a walk, and he set off to the local park, where he knew there would be no noise apart from the sound of trees. He found all this talk of the cards, of Mio, of course everybody was still fascinated with that, and cruises, hard to get enthusiastic about, and Holly had not even noticed that he had taken off. She was entranced by Ravi and Jenny, and he had a mind to keep walking and see if anybody would even notice that he had gone. It wasn't a very nice day. He was glad that he had put his raincoat on and a hat. The streets were quiet, and he knew they were putting on a nice Boxing Day spread. He was peering into the windows of the house as he passed. There were some large properties in this part of London. The big house was in fact one of a row of large detached houses, and he marvelled again how Susan had got to inherit this amazing house. Over the years he'd got used to staying there, which was in the neighbourhood of the well-to-do and celebrities. Old Honora had had quite a few problems in the beginning when she had taken in the waves and strays, so to speak. Susan had brought it up to be a recognised refuge, and now it was again just a big house. They didn't have that many problems over the years. In fact, the women who came were generally just looking for help. The disturbances which had involved police occasionally were generally the men who had discovered the whereabouts of the escaped women and children. Susan had a good relationship with the local police. Years back, they often delivered new residents, and in the last few years there had been very little need for police. Chris had enjoyed working with Susan, but he was glad that the help was no longer needed. He was thinking it would be good for him and Holly to go away for a few days in the new year. Just him and Holly. The last year had been so involved with the new members, pregnancies, writings and tarot readings. He was going to walk around another block before returning to the hub of the big house. Now, where could they go for a few days' recuperation? He didn't fancy a campervan trip like Susan and David were planning. His idea was a plane trip somewhere, to a place of tranquility, without a 10-hour flight. He pondered destinations. Chapter 74, At the Big House. Holly and Susan had started preparing the buffet for an early dinner. Auntie Leni, Eva and Jenny got on like a house on fire. Jenny and Ravi were so professional, and Leni was dying to know how all this had come about. Melanie had taken Milton upstairs, and Faye had taken Lydia for a nap before they were going to eat. A buffet was the easiest. Faye was thinking that it had been a long time that there were so many people in the house. She'd got a little overwhelmed when there were so many, and she had been glad to withdraw with Lydia for some quiet time. It was nice that she could withdraw to their own quarters. They will have a bit of building work going on here in the new year. Anna and Peter were making their accommodation more private, and Susan had mentioned to her that maybe she and Ben should look at making their rooms more accommodating for a family. Faye was using the big kitchen to cook, and they had all used the utility room for washing, etc. But it would be nice to change another room to a kitchen and bathroom of their own. She felt very much at home here now, and there were no plans to travel to China in the near future. All their previous plans had gone out of the window, and in many ways she was happy that they were all enjoying each other's company. Anna was still somewhat in charge, and they had spent much time planning their quarters together. 2013 will be a busy year, Melanie was thinking. Melanie will be gone by mid-January, but her place on the coast was now big enough to accommodate visitors, and Faye intended to take them up on that. Chapter 75. They had eaten. Time had just flown, and after some had gone into the inside-outside plays in the garden, the dishes were tidied and coffee was made, everyone settled back into the conservatory. Lydia and Milton seemed to benefit from sleeping in the same house upstairs, as it was all quiet on the monitors. By the time it was 8, everyone had gathered, and Jenny and Ravi were happy to do a tarot reading. They agreed that the question was how things would be faring in the new year of 2013. They had sat themselves at the table and Jenny was shuffling. Chris found himself shushing everybody, although he was probably the least interested in what the cards had to say. Jenny was using her own design deck and had laid a 5-card spread, like Leni had done recently. Everyone was looking expectantly when she turned the cards, and there was a general ooh when the first card was opened or turned. 15, the devil again. The winged wand, the roots of the problem and the causes of the present. Guys, let me lay them out and then we talk through it. This one, the descent to the underworld, is easy. She raised her eyebrows, looking at everyone until they all burst out laughing. Facilis descensi averni, she proclaimed. Everyone looked at the card. They handed it around eventually. Jenny looked at Leni, who was shaking her head. A really ugly depiction of a devil. The second card, the knot, the current issue and its potential developments, was 14, temperance. Another major arcana, Jenny said. Quatum satis, just enough. Wow, this is Archangel Gabriel, bringing health and harmony. Now, there is hope, people. She continued to lift the cards. The third card, the 3 of Wands, a card of creativity depicting the obstacles to the current situation. Well, this card, you see the frog there waiting, sure of a prey to come. A hopeful card, despite an obstacle. This is about prey. If you are the insect here, there is less hope than there is for the frog. Now let us see number 4, favorable conditions. The white snake. The 3 of Swords, the mind. Well, as you see, this night he's facing the dragon. See the tail? It continues to pierce the umbilical cord of the hero, who strips himself naked and fights with himself. I cannot help feeling this coming year's true beginning of a big change. Jenny looked around the room. Ravi knew that Jenny had recently continued to get readings which, to her, were clearly a warning, even to the whole of humanity. She didn't usually use such dramatic terms, and in personal readings she strictly kept to the person she was reading for, but in this group, with such diverse interests, never mind the list, which she by now had learned much about, this was interesting. Let's see, the culmination is the King of Pentacles. She lifted the last card. Pentacles depicting matter. And here we see the King of Pentacles. This is Luca Pacioli studying the golden spiral and divine proportions of solids. Knowledge, control, and possession of goods. Wow, she looked around. Melanie caught her eye. She looked almost shocked. Chris exclaimed, Pentacles again. What does it actually mean, Jenny? Sorry. I really hate to be rude, but the tarot is not something He looked around and said almost sheepishly, I believe in. I just cannot see how anyone can say that these cards can really tell you something meaningful. He almost blushed, but he was determined to say what he thought, and was relieved when Ravi burst out laughing, which infected everybody in the room, and like a wave the laughter rang through the room. You're not the first to say that, Chris. Jenny looked at him with laughter in her eyes. And not the last. Ravi had to keep giggling. He had not been interested in the cards before he met Jenny, but the years they had been together changed his mind, and he himself was quite adept now at interpreting. This deck is new to me too. I was there when Jenny created them, but that generally happened back in her little office, and apart from being asked about design and a little advice here and there, she did them all herself. Ravi was proud of her. A little advice here and there from you, but all the other stuff came from the universe. You don't think I could have dreamt these up, do you? Jenny looked around the room. She had told Leni all about how she became a tarot reader, and that was not by her own design. Her dream had been to be an interior decorator and designer. You see, it helps to have good questions, and it's fun in a room full of people to look at something general. Now, we are leaving 2012, and I personally believe we are entering a whole new era. Me too. Melanie piped up, and everyone looked at her, which had her blush. Mio was right there and did not seem to want to go away. Well, we too. She relaxed into her seat, and everyone fell quiet. Jenny and Ravi looked at each other and smiled. What fun evening this is. It is no coincidence that both recent readings had the devil as the root of the problem. Melanie paused and looked around the room. In Mio fashion, Tony was thinking. We love the fun of your research. Mio looked at Jenny, and she felt goosebumps all over her arms. You are a gifted reader, Jenny, and Ravi. Mio gazed at Ravi, who had the same reaction as Jenny, goosebumps. We know that many of your readings are pointing to this. It plays itself out in individual lives and on the big stage, the microcosm and macrocosm, and it is, if we may say, going to be biblical. Melanie paused, almost as if for effect, but all could see that she was considering her words as she was realizing what Mio was conveying, and all she could think of was Milton. She felt a wave of love and was reassured by Mio that forewarned is forearmed. She was back to herself and voiced what she felt from Mio, that it is best to know something is coming, some change, some movement towards a better world, at least for her. Believing is seeing. Thank you, Melanie, or shall I say Mio? Jenny smiled. I have to say, my readings have been a bit ominous lately. The devil comes up a lot. Hearing about the Mayan calendar and the end times, it does not seem as if we are at the end of an epoch. It does seem as if we are at the end of an epoch. And that means the beginning of a new era, the age of Aquarius. Jenny felt quite taken with the words Mio had said to her. She could distinctly feel the wisdom was not Melanie's. Not that much had been said, but it was the whole atmosphere in the room which was filled with promise, anxiety, and excitement. Anna had been feeling her baby kicking throughout the evening and felt suddenly overwhelmingly tired. I am glad to see that this horrid card seems to always be at the root of the problem. It makes me tired to feel this darkness lurking. This place was a refuge for me like no other. She felt like the Anna who had come here almost sold as a prostitute was a memory which would stay with her as a warning and a lesson, but she was past it. For her, this was enough. She had never felt happier than she had this last year, planning a future with Pete, who worshipped the ground she walked on. She smiled at him. Pete loved the obscure and the occult and the mysterious, and he could not wait to greet his new offspring, Joseph Jacob, JJ. He was part of this whole story, and her relationship with Melanie and Anna's relationship with Melanie had bonded since they found out that her little Milton was an incarnation of Natalie. Natalie, who had taken her life in the refuge in 2011, and whose pregnancy was now reincarnated as Milton, fast asleep upstairs, a few days old and thriving. She almost felt her head spinning and thought she might go to bed soon. This was a lot. Jenny, did David tell you about my little JJ? Anna had spoken before she could stop herself. "No, do tell me. I love to know how mysterious our lives really are." Jenny was laughing. She had been told some of the history of the house, but could not recall any mention of Anna's 7 months pregnancy. "Well, my little JJ, Joseph Jacob, is the incarnation of Natalie, who took her own life in this house over a year ago. She was young and she was sadder than anyone should be at that age." Suddenly Anna felt a wave of gratitude. She felt so happy that she started to laugh. Everybody soon joined her. Laughter is infective, even without a reason. Although everybody had their pictures in their mind, Chris started to feel slightly claustrophobic again. "Here we go," he thought, and was the first to hear noises from the monitor in Milton's room. Before anybody could notice, he was up the stairs to check on his little grandson. Tony had seen his dad leaving the room. He had also noticed the sniffling over the monitor and thought that it might be a good thing if his dad had his own time with his son. He could never help himself smiling when he thought of those words. He wished he could be a fly on the wall, but forced himself to stay and listen to Jenny's interpretation of the coming year. Chris tried to open the door as quietly as possible, and when he peered into the cot, Milton's smiling eyes were looking expectantly at him, almost like he knew it was me, Chris thought, and immediately considered this fanciful. He remembered when Tony had been a baby. He had been a very inexperienced dad. Holly seemed competent from the off and was largely in charge. His working days were long, but he remembered loving taking Tony out on weekends, often to give Holly a break. He took Milton from his cot. He was wide-eyed, and Chris found himself rocking him, humming a nursery rhyme. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." He had no problem remembering the tune and continued to pace the room, humming with Milton, dropping off to sleep again. Chris sat down on the big settee and settled Milton on his chest. He was just going to rest here for a minute, the talk of pentacles, swords and wands fading into the background of his mind. That was the end of chapter 75. Lydia, have a good Wednesday.